Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and today we're going to be looking at repairing the paint on a vintage Masters of the Universe He-Man head. Now recently I've done a video showing you how to repaint the heads on vintage Skeletors, and that seemed very popular as he is one of the main characters of the show and often suffers with quite a lot of damage to the paint on his skull, face and all of those sorts of areas. So if I've done him, I might as well carry on and do He-Man, because he is the main character from the Masters of the Universe, and again he does suffer with quite a lot of damage to the hair and eyes on his head, and it also depends on which version of the figure you have as to how damaged he is. In front of me here you can see I have a selection of different He-Man figures. I've even got my custom Wonder Bread version of He-Man, which I did in a previous video. I'll put a link to that video in the description of this one, so if you want to make your own Wonder Bread version, then do check out that video. But first off, let's take a look at some of the faces of He-Man and see what sort of damage he suffers with. First up here we have just a standard He-Man figure, and you can see this poor chap has been through the wars. I'm not quite sure what happened to him, but he's obviously been very well played with. I know when I picked this guy up at a flea market, I think it was, he was absolutely covered in dirt, and I've tried to clean his head as best I can, but you can see there's quite a lot sort of ground into the back of his hair, and it makes him look rather messy. He's also lost all of the paint on his teeth. He should have little white teeth there, and most of the paint on his eyebrows and eyes has been worn away. So that is one candidate for being repainted. We'll get him looking quite nice. He should really look like this. You can see this is not too bad a condition He-Man. He's got a little bit of paint wear, but you can see the white paint on his teeth. He's got fairly well defined eyebrows and eyes, and his hair is a nice sort of, well, what we're going to call it, a sort of golden yellow colour. So that's what he needs to look like, not this. Another version of He-Man which you often seem to find here is the French version, and for some reason the French version suffers really badly with paint loss. You can see this is a French version of He-Man, and the hair is actually a much more yellowy colour, but it tends to chip away. So you can see this one, he's lost a little bit of his teeth and most of his eyebrows, but the hair is quite damaged. I have one other French He-Man, and this is the one we're actually going to be working on today. And this is the sort of very damaged French He-Man I've got. You can see most of the paint has disappeared around the front of his hair, so we'll sort that out. And his eyes have actually been painted on quite badly, so we'll see if we can tidy those up and sort of repaint his teeth as well. But for some reason French He-Man always tends to look this sort of battered and this sort of damaged. The final He-Man we will fix up is this Thunder Punch He-Man. You can see again it's a slightly different sculpt on the head, but he does suffer with a lot of paint wear around his hair. I think he's missing a little bit of an eyebrow there as well, so we'll get this guy looking sort of half decent. He's not the worst of them, but certainly some paint touch-ups will make him look a whole lot better. So those are the three He-Men that we are going to work on. One French version, one sort of classic original version, and a Thunder Punch He-Man, and we'll make them all look like they should have done back when you bought them off the toy shelves in the 80s. Now when I go about working out how to sort of do the paint schemes on these old figures, the first thing I do is spend a good sort of hour or so mixing paint to see if I can get something that matches, and I'll end up with a bit of paper like this, and this is just me messing around. I bought a sort of yellow paint that was fairly close but not quite right, so I sort of work out what I need to mix into it, you know, whether I need to mix another yellow or a different brown or some black or some white, and just sort of mix together until I end up with a colour that actually sort of suits the figure. And that's what this sort of piece of paper shows me. It's how I'm working out which shade of sort of colours actually end up making the colour that I need. And you can see it sort of, I get there roughly. This is the French He-Man, so this has actually got very yellow here. If I show you the normal He-Man, you can see I sort of mix things together and get rough matches, and then I fine tune it, and this is the fine tuning bit of paper, and you can see there that colour there is my match, and that's what we're going to be mixing today, and that's what we're going to be repainting this original He-Man head with. The French one will use a slightly different colour. We're going to start with the classic He-Man's hair, because that's the one that I think most people will want to fix. Now it's a sort of slightly off yellow colour, so what I've done is I've bought a colour called, this is a Game Colour 72007, and this is made by the company Vallejo, and I've shown you their paints before, but this is one specifically designed for sort of gaming models, and it's a very nice sort of vibrant nice goldy yellow, as you can see there, but it's just not quite the right shade to match He-Man's original hair. So what I've done is I've got also some Humbrol acrylics, and this is number 186, which is a sort of milk chocolatey brown. Now I buy Humbrol's mainly, but at the moment I can't find them, so that's why I'm buying Vallejo colours. But there are charts online that will convert the numbers that are used for Humbrol's to Vallejo. So if you want to get sort of the same brown in the Vallejo colour, just check out one of the charts. It will tell you what 186 is in sort of the comparative colour for Vallejo colours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of this brown colour and mix it into the yellow, and I just sort of keep mixing until I get the shade that I want. It's a sort of guessing game really, because all of the figures that I have here have slightly different shades of yellow hair. So I'm just going to sort of mix a little bit and then sort of test it, and at some point I will get the match that I want. We'll be doing exactly the same when it comes to the French He-Man, because none of these colours are sort of a perfect match. All you can do is get something that's roughly right and mix until you get it to match. So as you can see, I've mixed these two together and I've ended up with a colour that I'm very happy with actually. I think it's a pretty close match. This is my sort of test bed He-Man, so this is the one that I want to match closely. And you can see it's just a little bit bright. It always tends to dry a little bit darker, so I'm thinking that is quite a good match. Maybe I just put a little bit more of the brown in. But this is going to be, I think, the colour that I go with. The one I want to paint has got most of his hair missing, so we're going to paint all of it anyway. If you were touching and sort of patching up, you'd want to maybe mix it a little bit closer, but as I'm replacing all of the hair, this should be good. So let's just put a little bit on this one again, just to make sure. Yeah, that's really a very satisfactory mix. So you can see it's a fair amount of brown goes into this gold yellow. But we've got it right now, so I'm going to paint this all over this figure. Might need a couple of coats just because there's some dark patches, but I think that's going to make quite a nice difference to him. Yeah, amazing. Always makes a big difference when you put fresh paint on like that. So let's get this all painted up. There you go, I think that has covered pretty nicely. It might be I'll come back and do a little bit of a second coat just because there were some very dark patches underneath, but we'll let that dry. I think that is a very nice match to the original He-Man colours. So we can just compare it there. There's my original one. At the moment you can see it's quite shiny, but once that dries off that'll look nice. And we'll put a top coat on at the end as well to make it match this sort of sheen. For the French issue He-Man, we can start with those two colours that we've already mixed, but we need to add a little bit of white. So I've just got some Vallejo model colour, and this is 7951, just flat white. If we add that to the mix that we've done, it just lightens it a little bit. You can see it makes it just a little bit more of a sort of solid yellow. I think that is what's going to match this colour. We just do a little test. Yeah, almost. There's sort of no set colours for these. If I actually bring in my other French He-Man, which is the one I really want to match, this one is a much more vibrant yellow. You can see there's quite a difference between the two tones of those, and it's really this colour that I want to match. So actually I'll just paint a little bit on here. You can see, yeah, that's almost a perfect blend. So I'll just wipe that off. And that's the colour I'm going to go for, the sort of other sort of shade of French He-Man, because this guy has lost all his hair anyway. So let's paint this one with that much more sort of bright yellow French He-Man colour. Yeah, that looks nice. We'll go with that. And the paint application on these original figures is quite scruffy, so you don't have to be particularly neat around the edges. If you want to make it look like the original figures, be a little bit messy. I'm going to follow the sort of detailing on the hair as best I can, but I don't want it to look too perfect because they never looked this perfect, you know, when they came from the factory. There you go, that is French issue He-Man. I've left it quite scruffy around the front, as you can see, just to sort of match the original way it would have been painted. I don't want this one to be too perfect. I think the other one's going to look really nice, but this French issue one I want to be that little bit scruffier. And it's you can see what a difference the colour is. It's such a sort of more vibrant yellow than the original He-Man's hair colour. I'm now going to try and match the Thunder Punch He-Man's version of the hair, which has got a slight more sort of orangey tinge to it. It's very close to the paint that I've just sort of done on this one. You can see that is pretty good, but I really would like to try and sort of make that one final sort of tweak to it. So I've got the same colours here. We've got the 186 Humbrol Brown, we've got the Game Colour Gold Yellow that I've used on the other two, but I've also got a little bit of 238, which is a Humbrol Red. So I'm going to mix these two up to make the sort of traditional, I'm going to call it the traditional sort of He-Man hair colour, and then add a tiny amount of red, and I think that should mean that we will get this slightly orange tinge so that I can just repaint the front part of his hair. Let's just get mixing. Yeah, and there you go. I think that is as close as I'm going to get. So a very small amount of the red in there just gives it a little bit more of a sort of orange tinge. I'm going to repaint all of his hair anyway again because it's quite damaged. So it's subtle mixing. It's the same basic mix as the other two sort of sets of hair, but rather than adding white like we did for the French He-Man, we've added a tiny amount of red. And yeah, that's going to look good. So let's get his hair painted, and then we can move on to doing the eyes and the teeth. So there we go, that's not looking too bad at all. It's covered quite nicely. I'm going to let all of this hair paint dry, and then we can come on to sort of sorting out his teeth and his eyes.
P-O-Y, P-O-L-L-O-I.
Another area that people will want to touch up on He-Man is obviously his boots, because you get a lot of scuff marks. You can see there's a lot of scuffing going on these boots. And for that I've mixed two colours together. I have a red-brown, which is number MC235, which is a Meng colour. Not a paint I have many of, but I'm sure you can get this sort of shade in other brands. And I've also mixed that with 238 Humbrol Red, which we've used before. And mixing those two together, you can get a shade that, as you can see here, if I paint it onto his boot, that's actually a very nice match. By the time that's dried down and sort of darkens a little bit, that will look really quite nice. So that's the two colours that I'm going to be using to just touch up the scuffs on his boot. But as always, every single figure will have slightly different shades of paint, so you will need to mix to make it match perfectly. For the teeth, we're just going to be using some plain white acrylic. Again, this is the same paint that I used earlier, but for applying it, rather than using a brush, I have made this little tool. And what I've done is I've taken a pin and just inserted it into an old paintbrush, so that I've got a very small little point that I can can pick a tiny amount of the paint up with and use the point of the pin then to apply it to the areas I want. This is very useful if you're just trying to apply small amounts of paint. I also have a wet cotton bud here just in case it goes wrong and I want to sort of wipe away the paint if it's sort of in the wrong position. So let me rearrange the camera and I'll show you how I apply this paint. We'll just paint his teeth to start with, then we can use the same technique to do his eyes. I've got a small amount of paint on the end of the pin there. I'm just going to very carefully try and apply it. This is a very small area, so it's not easy. You don't have to worry too much if you sort of go outside the area, because you can actually come back and scrape this off once it's dried using the same pin. We'll put a little bit too much on, and then I'll come back and I'll sort of fine tune where I want the paint to be with the pin later on. So that actually looks a little bit messy at the moment, but I'm not going to worry about that because we'll let it dry and then I'm going to scrape away the excess. It's just about getting a small amount of paint on there to start with. In fact, we might even be able to take some of that paint away now. I've just cleaned the pin and now I can just try and scrape some of this away. Just like that, you see. See, that's starting to look better. So it's just a case of sort of carefully doing it and fine-tuning it. Some will be easier to paint than others. This French He-Man, as I say, is a little bit on the sort of messy side anyway. So you can see as I'm working around, I'm just sort of scraping away some of the excess paint and tidying up the edges. It's starting to look quite neat. I'll do the top lip as well, then we'll let that dry properly. I'll do some of the other teeth. So there you go. I think that is not too bad at all. I'm going to let that dry fully and then I'll just do a little bit more sort of tidying up, just scraping the paint away with the pin head. But you can see that's actually a very neat sort of way of getting his teeth repainted. So let's repaint the other two figures. We'll use the exact same process to put the eyes and eyebrows back on the figures, but this time with black paint. So this is Vallejo model colour 70.950 and that is just flat black. And again, got the pin here, tiny amount on the end of the pin, and then I should just be able to sort of draw back on his missing eyebrow there. There you go, I think that looks better. I'll work on the other two now as well. The final job in this repainting process is just to put a top coat on it, and we're going to be using this clear satin varnish, which is again a Vallejo one. This is number 70.522. It's an acrylic varnish and it will go on clear. It looks like it's a bit sort of milky when you first put it on, but it actually dries quite clear, and it should give us the same sort of sheen though once it's dry that the original hair paint had. I've previously used Humbrol acrylics number 135, but I just thought I'd try this one just to see what it's like. So this is the first time I'm actually going to be using it, but it looks looks like it should work just the same as the home rule stuff. So basically we paint this over all the areas that we have painted and let everything dry. So I'll even paint over the sort of little bits of teeth and eyebrows on these figures as well, just to make sure that everything is nicely sort of held in place and has got a sort of a bit of a firmer top coat on top of it. I get a small amount on the brush. You can see that it's a little bit sort of milky as it goes on, but when it dries it will dry clear. And here are the finished figures. They do look much better than they started out as, because all of these had quite a lot of playwear to them. Let's take a look at the He-Man original version first. You can see there that looks a whole lot better. If I put up a comparison of the original sort of figure, you can see what a difference it makes just adding new paint to him. And if we turn him around, you can see the hair is now a nice even tone of colour. So yeah, it really makes quite a big difference. The eyes and teeth are a little bit sort of fiddly to paint, but as you can see you can actually get them looking pretty reasonable. And this is the one that I've repainted the boots on. You can see those look really quite nice as well. Then we move on to French He-Man. Now he obviously it's supposed to look a little bit sort of rough around the edges. I've left the eyes pretty much as they were. I just repainted the eyebrows, and the eyes themselves are how it was sort of painted originally, so it's a pretty poor paint application, but that's just the French version of He-Man. You can see his teeth are nicely repainted as well, and if we turn him round you can see how even the hair is now. It's just that little bit more blonde than the sort of other original version of He-Man there. And then finally we have Thunder Punch He-Man. For this one I only had to touch up a little bit on his eyebrows. The rest was really the hair, and as you can see this hair is just that sort of little bit more sort of orangey red. It's funny that they all have slightly different sort of tones to them, but they do, and it's worth sort of trying to match them as best you can. But as you can see, again, he's looking really rather nice. So that's it for my guide to how to repaint He-Man's head. If you haven't already watched it, then I recommend that you go and check out my how to repaint Skeletor's head, because that's much the same in how complicated it is and how many sort of processes you have to go through to get the right colours, but it's certainly worth doing on both of these figures. If you've enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.